Hey everybody, welcome back. We got a little test set up here so we can do some voltage drop testing on these different wires. So we've got two sizes of wire here. We've got our little teeny tiny 18 gauge and we've got our 14 gauge. So while those aren't super far apart, the diameter of those wires is pretty significantly different. So I'm trying to hold them up to the meter here so you get a little bit of scale, but you can see the size difference there. I mean, that's pretty significant. And remember, that's an 18 gauge versus a 14 gauge. So you've got 1 gauge of wire in between. You've got your 16 gauge, but those are only two sizes apart, and you get a lot more wire out of a 14 than you do an 18. So the more load you're carrying, the more wire you want, right? Just like the heavier your truck is, the more cables you want on a bridge you drive across. Same goes for electricity. So I've already got our 18 gauge wired up to our little power supply box here, running through some alligator clips into our driving light. We've got our meter set up, ready to go to test. Voltage drop. So voltage is the potential or the pressure, right? So a voltage drop is you're measuring the difference in potential. So I've got my one probe on my positive here. When I'm checking for voltage drop in this wire, I'm gonna go probe here, and that'll give me the difference or what is being dropped or eaten up within this wire. If I went from here to here, all that's telling me is the difference from positive and negative on this unit, right? So I'm gonna set the camera up here. We're gonna get this test rolling and see what we find. So we'll turn our unit on. Driving light's functioning. It's running at just over 12 volts. Looks like it's about 4 amps. So now when I go on here, we have a voltage drop of about 54 millivolts, right? So this wire is using 54 millivolts. Let's check our ground side. So it looks like the ground is using about 60 millivolts. So there's a 50 millivolt drop on the positive and a 60 millivolt drop on the negative wire. We're gonna go ahead and swap wires out and we'll check the other circuits. All right. We are set back up, power the meter back on, power our circuit back on. Still running just over 12 volts. Looks like our amperage has dropped just a hair, which is a good sign. So we got our probe on our negative lead right now, so we might as well check that one first. So larger wire brings us down to a 35, 36 millivolt drop. So a little less of a volt drop with a little larger wire. Let's go ahead and check our positive wire. Positive wire is all the way down to 8 millivolts. So this wire is great. That means we must have a really good connection on both ends. We're not losing anything in the connections. So that's another thing to be aware of. If we're voltage drop testing, you want to try and be on each end of the cable. Because if you're on the other side of this connection here, or you're on the other side of this connection here, you could be picking up a volt drop that is between the wire and this thumb screw and not necessarily the wire itself. So let's come back over here real quick to our negative lead. You can now see our meters reading our actual circuit voltage potential. So let's come back here, get back on there, and let's mess with this thumb screw a little bit and see if we can decrease our volt drop at all. So you can see how moving this wire around is actually manipulating our voltage drop. All right, that's it. Let's see how you do in the lab.